Hello friend, welcome back to Heritage Homestead. The snow just keeps coming around here. This is a lot for central Pennsylvania and it's really beautiful. I'm trying to enjoy it, but I'm also feeling pretty impatient for spring. We're in the midst of the Three Rivers Challenge right now, so I'm doing lots of scratch cooking using pantry staples and foods preserved from last gardening season. This week, I am determined to tackle my family's breakfast habits. We have been in a bit of a breakfast rut. John and I eat scrambled eggs almost every morning, and that's fine, but we could use a change of pace. And then my daughter's allergic to eggs, so the kids end up eating cereal, and that's just not ideal. It's not clean ingredients, it's not cheap, and it doesn't keep them full. So I want to make some make-ahead breakfasts that we can easily heat and throw together in the mornings. So today we're going to be making a breakfast casserole, waffles, granola, and some pumpkin muffins. Starting with a breakfast casserole, this will be for John and I. So I'm just putting eggs, milk, salt, and cheese into this bowl to get started. Now we come to my secret ingredient. Unfortunately, I can't use it today because I didn't think far enough ahead. I'm going to be using a cup of sour cream. But if you really want to make this casserole more rich and have a lighter, fluffier texture, instead of sour cream, I recommend using creme fraiche. Creme fraiche is very simple to make, but you do have to think ahead to make it. So it can be made by combining 2 cups of heavy cream with about 2 tablespoons of buttermilk. Give those a good stir. They should be combined in something glass and very clean, and then set aside for 1 to 2 days, 24 to 48 hours. After that 1 to 2 days, you'll find that you have this beautifully thick, rich tasting, kind of sour cream-esque ingredient that's so good in an egg casserole or a breakfast casserole, and is really good being swapped for sour cream in a lot of different contexts. So I wish I'd had that today, but I only thought of it yesterday. At least you can see what this looks like, and for today we'll use sour cream. It'll still be good. Now we're gonna prep some onion and some pepper. I'm gonna cut up 1 onion, and I've got summer garden peppers in the freezer. I'll chop up about the equivalent of 1 bell pepper. Chopping frozen peppers is a little tricky. I always freeze them in strips because I mostly use them to saute with onions for fajitas, but for this meal I definitely want them diced. Peppers are one of the few things that I can say I absolutely grew a year's supply of last year, which feels pretty good. We have plenty more peppers. In the Three Rivers Challenge, I find myself getting into this mentality of thinking that we want to use up all the food we've stored now. And it's true, the next gardening season's coming, but still, I have to remind myself, I'm a good 6 months away from getting peppers. I don't want my peppers used up. So I've got plenty more in the freezer. I think I grew enough for the family, but also my mom grew more than she needed and has been sharing them with me. So we're gonna work peppers into everything we can. I'm just gonna get a little butter and olive oil going in this pan. I like using both when I wanna caramelize veggies. If I'd been thinking, I would have started with these veggies because they'll take a little time, but that's okay. We can prep some other parts of this casserole. That's so pretty. I love seeing colorful veggies cook. I definitely want to grow more onions this year. I grew about a 3-month supply of onions. So it'd be nice if I could grow something to last maybe half the year. While those veggies are cooking, I'm gonna go ahead and add in my bacon. Sometimes I put a pound of ground sausage in this, or sometimes I cook up bacon on my own, but today I'm gonna take the easy route and just put in some bacon bits. pepper and onion has browned up beautifully. It's ready to go in. And then that's it. I've made this casserole many times before, and there are two things I really like about it. One is that it's versatile. It's easy to swap out the protein for whatever I have on hand. And the other thing I like about it is that it reheats well. That's the key for the make-ahead breakfast. It's got to be something we want to eat reheated. So we can just cut a piece of this in the morning, pop it into the microwave, and we're using eggs from our chickens, and it keeps me full. I feel good about that. First breakfast is in the oven. That'll take about 40 minutes. And we're ready to start on the second. Moving on to waffles. Waffles for us are something that I usually make on the occasional snow day or a Saturday morning, a time when we can really afford to take our time with breakfast. So they are not a convenience food for us, but today my plan is to freeze them, and that way they can be a convenience food. My kids really like them, and if they could just put a waffle into the toaster. I'm a child of the 80s, so Eggo waffles are what I remember, but I'm pretty sure this will be much cleaner than an Eggo waffle. Also, it's nice when we're making it ourselves, I can substitute for the eggs because my daughter's allergic. Do you need to make a cup of coffee? You can go ahead. Yeah.
That smells so good out here.
That's the casserole. Oh, well, I made sauteed some onions and peppers, but that's what you smell. I'm using King Arthur measure for measure flour here. That's my favorite gluten-free flour blend. This is not a gluten-free recipe, so I'm just swapping it 1-to-1 for flour. This recipe also includes some sugar. If you've been following along with the channel lately, you know I've been staying away from sugar because it just doesn't make me feel good. We are not an easy crowd to bake for with avoiding gluten and sugar and eggs. So sometimes I make a dish that's just for some members of the family, and that's okay. I'll eat egg casserole while the kids get to enjoy the waffles, and it'll all be good. Putting in that melted butter. And 2 cups of milk. You can do whatever you need to do, John. 2 teaspoons vanilla. And then I'm trying something new today. Usually I use applesauce as my substitute for egg, but I read recently that seltzer water is a very good egg substitute. I read that the carbonation gives some lift to baked goods, so I'm going to try it out. 1/4 cup per egg is the substitution rate, so I'm going to put in 1/2 cup for the 2 eggs this recipe calls for. We'll see how it turns out.
When that casserole's done, I want a piece.
Okay.
It smells really good.
Good. All right. It's time for waffles. While the waffle iron heats up, I'm gonna grab my cooling racks. I definitely want these waffles to cool on racks instead of piling them up on a plate like I do when I serve them for breakfast. I don't want these to get soft at all as they cool down, because then they're going to be frozen, and I want them to be crisp when they're toasted and we're ready to eat them. While I was working on the waffles, the oven timer went off for my breakfast casserole, and I delayed just a few minutes. I was in the middle of the waffles and just didn't pull it out immediately. It got a little browned around the edges, but it definitely still tasted good. John and I tucked into this right away. You can see there's not much jiggle in the center. That means it's done. The waffles are cooling. The casserole's out of the oven. I actually just had some, so did John. It's good. So now we're gonna move on to some granola. I brought you along a couple weeks ago to make some coffee flavored granola. So I wanna do something different today. I'm just gonna do a simple maple and cinnamon granola recipe. This recipe calls for a teaspoon of salt. And I like salt, but I've found it to be pretty salty in the past. So I'm gonna go for a half teaspoon. For nuts, I'm using almonds. 1.5 cups. Then it calls for 2/3 cup dried fruit. I'm using some craisins. I get these from Azure and I really like them. They're apple juice infused, so they don't have any sugar. And I think the apple juice sweetens them, but allows you to still taste more of the cranberry. They're really good. And I don't feel quite as badly about them as I would with those sugar infused ones. Adding half a teaspoon of dried cinnamon. And I'm gonna give this a stir. I did 2/3 cup of dried fruit like I called for, but this is looking a little sparse to me, so I'm gonna add some more. Now it's time for the wet ingredients. The recipe calls for coconut oil or olive oil. I think coconut oil is a better flavor. It's more neutral tasting, but my daughter has reactions to coconut oil, so I'm going to use the olive oil. I actually didn't know that she had reactions to coconut oil because I used to cook with refined coconut oil and it didn't matter. And then I switched to cold pressed coconut oil from Azure and it bothered her. And it turns out she had a coconut allergy, but the oil we were using was so highly processed, it didn't resemble coconuts. So there is a difference when you buy that cold pressed stuff. It makes a difference. There's a teaspoon of vanilla. I'm gonna give this a whisk. I'm not sure where my whisk is. Just gonna gently combine this. I love how quickly granola comes together. To me, it's one of those things that's definitely worth making from scratch. It's just not a great effort. And the trick here is to make sure there's no dry pockets left. Every little grain should be coated. This will be really good for breakfast with yogurt. I brought you along for making yogurt last week. So we've got a good amount stocked in the fridge still. We'll have this with yogurt and maybe some berries. We're still buying some fresh fruit since I am giving us a small allowance on the pantry challenge. I really like having berries with my yogurt and granola. That'll take 20 minutes to cook and I'll stir it halfway through. John just came out for another serving of casserole, which is great. We're liking it. So this won't last long around here. I'm really glad I'm making these things. These waffles have finished cooling. So I'm gonna break them up into quarters. I'm gonna break them up into quarters because that's the size they'll be in when they go into the toaster. We'll be able to toast a quarter at a time. And my kids' serving sizes aren't always a whole waffle, so quarters are good for us. I'm just gonna get them lined up so that we can put them into the freezer, and I'm gonna flash freeze them before I pile them into a bag and put them all together for longer term storage. The last recipe for the morning is some pumpkin muffins, and they use oat flour. So I'm just going to grind some oats. I need 2 cups of oat flour, so I'm going to grind about 2.5 cups of oats and see if that gives me the right amount. Of course. All right, I'm starting off with some pumpkin butter. This recipe calls for 3/4 cup pumpkin puree. My mom gave me this pumpkin butter. It's basically puree plus seasonings. So I'll just skip the seasonings called for in the recipe, and I think this will work. Next, I should be adding 2 eggs. I'm going to keep going with my seltzer substitute. The waffles came out nice and fluffy, so I think I'm going to like this substitute. This might be my go-to from now on. Adding some yogurt, vanilla, some melted butter, maple syrup. This is now gluten-free, egg-free, sugar-free baking. Not typical, but I think it'll still be good. The timer just went off for my granola. It smells good in here. It smells like cinnamon. I'm gonna press this down. I like a kind of clustery granola, so I'm gonna press this down, and as it cools, it'll cool and sort of harden into a sheet, and then I can break up that sheet. All right, getting back to my pumpkin muffins. I've just whisked together my wet ingredients. Measuring cups and spoons are constantly dirty when you're juggling 4 recipes. Okay, I need a 1/2 teaspoon salt, plus a bit of baking soda. And I mentioned that I'm going to adjust the seasonings because I used pumpkin butter instead of pumpkin puree. So it calls for a tablespoon of cinnamon. I'm going to put in a teaspoon. I'll also skip the pumpkin spice that it calls for. And then finally, I've got my nice warm, freshly ground oat flour. I'll put 2 cups of this in there. It's really nice to have some recipes that call for this oat flour because we buy oats in bulk from Azure, so we always have them on hand, and it's so easy to just put them in the bullet and end up with some flour. These are ready for the muffin tin. I love these silicone muffin tins. I don't need any paper, I don't use any spray, and it's easy to just push up and get the muffin out. It's so cheery looking. I'm gonna get it into the oven. While I'm waiting on waffles to freeze and granola to cool and muffins to bake, I'm going to get started on a bit of the cleanup. I find that when I have a big project day where I'm doing several recipes at once, I just need to clean up right away. If I leave it to the end of the day, I'm completely worn out and it just overwhelms me. So while I've still got that morning energy, that before lunch energy, I'm going to get done what I can. I like to start with an empty dishwasher when I'm doing projects like this, and we always start the morning with an empty dishwasher. That just makes the day more manageable. So I'm loading up what I can, and then the rest I'll do by hand, and we'll be in good shape. The waffles have now had an hour to freeze in a single layer, and they're pretty solid, so now they can be stacked into bags. I'm just putting a little bit of parchment paper between each layer to prevent some sticking. The muffins don't quite have the lift of a traditional muffin or the height, but they're egg-free, gluten-free, so I'm not surprised at that. The texture was still really nice and the flavor was great. I will be making these again. This was my first time making this recipe and I will come back to it. It really did change the tone of our week to just have breakfasts ready before we woke up each morning. For the kids, it's no surprise the waffles were the favorite. That became a daily for them, so that's something I'll do more often. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you found something that's helpful for you. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you want to join me for more projects like this. I love being able to share what I'm doing with more people. I look forward to sharing more with you next week. Until then, be well. Bye.